Everyone has a birthday they'll always remember.
A birthday! I knew it! I'm sexy.
This is Andy's.
Rick Bazooka, ready to spring into action. Let's rule some armor. We got us a war to win. Who do you call him small? We have met the enemy. He is big. He is fat. There.
Miss Pierce is dead, Sparkles. She fell from the kitchen window.
I said talk to me, damn it, or else I'm gonna throw you in the fire!
You stupid bitch! You filthy slut! Did you fuck with me?
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Why haven't you done it yet?
Come on, guys. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for over a year. So if you haven't made the jump to Patreon yet, we can't stress enough. I'm pretty sure we got 37 bonus episodes, something along those lines back there now. So there's a lot content waiting for you, and we'd recommend making that jump. Speaking of which, we do have 3 new patrons to thank this week. We have Will Harahan. I believe Will was previously a patron, so he is back.
Thank you,
we
Will.
We like when people are coming back. We have no hurt feelings about you leaving at any point. We just like to see you back. We also have one Rick Kane. Welcome, Rick, and Abby Phelps. Awesome. So thanks to all of you guys. We appreciate it and hope you're enjoying all those bonus Patreon episodes. Other plug, iTunes. If you guys are listening on iTunes and you guys have been really liking the show, we would really appreciate it if you go over there and give us a good old rating and review. It helps us find new listeners, and we appreciate that as well. Also, we're on every podcast listener of choice.
Everything.
Again, nobody's yelled at me yet
YouTube,
for not being on
Spotify,
Spotify, Stitcher, exactly. So if you haven't, if you've just heard us randomly on SoundCloud or something and you want a more convenient place to listen to us, we are out there.
Yep.
All right. That, I think, wraps up the plugs for the week. I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back.
We are back talking sleazy movies once more, and this episode, it's the OG boys.
Yeah, that's right.
we
went guestless this time.
It doesn't happen too often, but back when this show first started, we didn't have guests for the first, I think, like 5 or 6. Yeah, at least a month or two of no guests. So. But we've got so accustomed to having guests on our free episodes.
The mic situation that we had to deal with for so long. But that's a long story.
It wasn't great. Yeah, way in the past now.
Yeah, exactly.
We've updated our mic situation. Exactly. But Jamie and I are going guestless this week because we wanted to do 2 movies that, I mean, I've wanted to bring on the show for a long time. These are childhood movies for me. I don't know about you. Were these both?
Yeah.
You saw them both as a kid?
Yeah.
All right. So this is going to be a bit of a personal episode for Jamie and I's childhoods. Maybe we're exposing our ages a little bit here. But also,
especially
one
with
of them...
Small Soldiers.
Exactly. And one of them has a remake, which should have opened in theaters by the time you guys are listening to this. I think should be in theaters.
Yeah.
So maybe you guys are already checking it out.
I hope it's good. I heard Mark Hamill is playing Chucky, which is interesting. Or at least voicing him. Like, I don't know if they're going to do the whole thing with like what they do in this film where he's Mark Hamill first and then goes into the doll.
Right.
So that'll be interesting to see if Mark Hamill plays like a badass villain.
And I mean, I've always kind of liked Brad Dourif as Chucky too, and I'm pretty sure...
I really love his voice.
I'm pretty sure Brad Dourif is still around too, so I'm curious why they wouldn't...
I know he was in the Halloween remake, Rob Zombie's, like, I guess that was a few years back.
Well, and he was just in the Deadwood movie. He's on the Western HBO show. So he's still around, so clearly maybe they couldn't get him back, or that's... Hopefully that doesn't mean anything. Or maybe he didn't want to do it. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe it's also something like a different direction. Maybe they're going completely...
I think so.
They wanted to forget entirely the 80s one, which, I mean, I love the 80s one. So
it does sound like the new one is the first one, I think, not written by Don Mancini, who was the writer of every single Chucky film up until... this one that's being released
I'm also curious if they're going to go in a more satirical route or if they're going to stick with what, like, the first one here that we're about to talk about, which actually although there is some humor because, you know, Chucky is this evil villain who cracks a few jokes here and there, I guess. But most of this one, he's just like a pure violent entity.
The humor is kind of like incidental. It's kind of like part of the premise. Like it's a silly premise.
As the series goes on, it just becomes a complete like parody of itself, basically.
Exactly. But I guess we should introduce these films before we get too far into this. We are going to be talking about Child's Play, 1988, directed by one Tom Holland and written by Don Mancini, who is the creator of this character, the Chucky, the killer doll, and has been writing every single movie up until whatever the last one was, Cult of Chucky in 2017. So he's been writing all of the Chucky movies since then, which is pretty crazy to me that he didn't get this franchise ripped away from him sooner. Most people don't even get to write their sequel.
Places, man. He really did.
Yeah, I was on a podcast a few months ago where I was talking Bride of Chucky with some guys at the...
So you've seen where it goes.
Yeah, it goes to some pretty gonzo places that I'm surprised they let him go to. But we're going to be pairing it with another movie about animated toys coming to life with violent intentions.
Yeah.
And
I remember this one, by the way, as a kid, scared me more than Child's Play did.
Oh,
which is weird. There's something about this one that is Joe Dante, man.
Yeah, it's going to be talking 1998 Joe Dante Small Soldiers.
Mm-hmm. They are frightening.
Yeah, they are little frightening soldiers. But yeah, both films involve toys coming to life to kill their owners in some capacity. I'm surprised there's even two of these movies that exist in this exact genre. A very niche genre. But that's what we're going to be talking about today, and I think that we are going to just jump right into it. We are going to be talking Child's Play.
No one believes the truth. Or lives to tell it. There's nothing nice about murder. And there's nothing innocent about Child's Play.
All right, we are talking Child's Play, the 1988 American horror slasher film directed and co-written by Tom Holland as well as David Kirshner and Don Mancini. It is the first film in what would become the Child's Play or Chucky series franchise, and obviously the first to feature the character Chucky, who would eventually sort of overtake the franchise as a whole, which wasn't necessarily what I think they intended when he first were conceptualizing the film. But I think a lot of people latched on to the design and just the wackiness of this premise overall.
Yeah. I mean, to see a toy that's clearly designed for children say like call like the mom a slut and all this shit. It's just like this kind of
it's shocking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And oddly humorous at times. Like there's like you don't want this doll to be doing this, but because you're watching something that's so bizarre, you just kind of have to laugh at times. I wouldn't say that the humor is like in the forefront in this one, really, compared to the other ones.
Well, yeah, because I think that you were right when you were talking about it. I think the idea is that there's just not a lot of jokes in this movie.
Right.
But the actual situation itself is so absurd that you can't help but like find it, you know, sometimes humorous and shocking in its own regard. And I was on another podcast talking about this, the Your Obligatory Movie podcast a few months ago, where we were talking Bride of Chucky. So for anyone who listened to that episode, some of this might be a little regurgitated, but basically I wanted to mention off the top, this was one of the first R-rated movies I ever saw. This and RoboCop.
Me too. Not RoboCop, but this one, yeah.
And I don't remember the exact context of how I saw this movie. I know that my mom watched R-rated movies, and maybe I just like, you know, caught a little bit by like sneaking in or like taking a peek or whatever. Yeah. But Chucky gave me literal nightmares. I don't remember nightmares or dreams at all as an adult, but I can visualize the nightmares I had as a child, and I can vividly remember like Chucky grabbing my feet with his little knife at the end of my bed, coming out of my closet and stuff like that, and I was horrified. Like I had like sweaty nightmares as a result of this movie as a child. So that was my first experience with it. And on rewatches,
pretty impactful.
Yes, very impactful early cinematic experience. And since then, I've only really kind of grown to latch on to the movie because of, for me, it was actually kind of the children's advertising angle of this film.
Sure.
I grew up with a single mom, and I grew up watching a lot of TV shows that tried to sell me shit.
Yep.
So
YTV and all that.
So I find this movie in terms of conception like just very, very relatable, and I find myself especially focusing on how just bad I feel for this working class mom who's trying to like...
She's just trying to make her kid happy, right?
Yeah, and she sees... And I mean, the child actor, I think, who plays Andy is actually quite good in the film. He mostly plays it innocent. It doesn't go into that realm of like obnoxious. It goes into that realm of just like... Because the kid's just kind of like, okay, when you can't get the toy, but the mom, mom,
there's disappointment there, and I was very glad to see that they didn't, do it over the top or anything like that.
Yeah, we're like, the kid's
likable.
like freaking out or like anything.
Because you
like
still
that.
want to make this kid likable before he's about to go through this entirely traumatic experience. So
yeah. Well, and those early scenes where he's like watching the Good Guy TV show, and he's just like, I've seen this one or whatever, and like, and the TV show pivots directly into like a commercial for the doll,
yep,
basically. And this is a thing that's always kind of fascinated me, is the idea of like, first of all, how is children's advertising like legal? Like when you really think about it, you're just like,
there should at least be more regulations towards it.
Well,
like we'll get to it, but they even talk a lot about it with like Small Soldiers, where essentially they're just lying to children. That's really what it is. If they were just like, here's the action figure, and they showed like a couple kids playing with it, I wouldn't mind as much. But the fact that they're like showing it fly across the whole world, and also beams are coming out of its eyes, and whatever.
And for me especially, it's how just directly entwined it is with the like program itself, like the show that they're watching.
We're programming the kid to love this, and then they're also like, now we'll cut to buying this. Please buy this. You need it. Like
exactly. And their minds aren't fully developed, and they're basically just like training them to consume very, very early on. And later Child's Play films would actually address this a little bit. Child's Play 2 and 3 both kind of have dive a little deeper into the idea of the actual corporation and the actual factory and stuff like that, where they are making the Good Guy dolls.
Even, like in the second one, it's funny that the factory itself is almost what destroys Chucky. At the end. So that's
they have a big factory finale that's really great in Child's Play 2. And from what I understand, when Mancini was conceptualizing this film, he actually had a little bit more. They did rewrite his draft of the script in a way that kind of made it a little bit more sort of like a typical slasher, whereas he wanted an idea of like the doll makes its way into the home, and like Andy it's like kind of also like weirdly fleshy and stuff like that, and Andy forges like a blood bond with the doll, and the doll starts like acting out all of Andy's like suppressed rage, so it starts like trying to like target the other children and stuff like that he's mad at.
He really wanted to go in deep with that. He really wanted psychological.
He wanted to connect the doll and the child a little bit more, to the point where it was supposed to be more confusing on whether Andy or the doll is doing it.
Oh, so they were basically almost what the detective is thinking at first. Yes. They wanted that to go throughout the entire film.
Yeah, his original draft of the screenplay had a little bit more of that, but that subtext still remains throughout the entire film. This idea of something insidious making its way into your home through means that seem innocuous, like you're watching
and taking advantage of innocence. Because it's like you obviously. He thinks, it's like when you had that little stuffed animal when you were 7. If it started talking when you were 7, you'd probably be like, hell yeah. You know what I mean?
Sick.
Sweet, I got a talking animal. So and what's interesting too is the way that they direct it is they have it, or I guess write it, is how they have all the conversations between Andy and Chucky until I guess near more the end. They have them all just Andy telling you that Chucky's been saying this.
Right.
So there's still a bit of that, like, what's happening here? Is it just innocence? Is he lying? We don't know.
Exactly. He's a child. His brain is still developing. Like, you don't know exactly what's happening or what he's thinking, or, so this movie does mine a lot of that. And I think every time I rewatch this film, the thing I'm the most surprised about it is how patient it is with the premise.
Yeah.
Because it takes a long time before Chucky reveals himself. I want to say it's about halfway through the movie before you actually see Chucky in his full-out psycho form.
Yeah, because most of it is just little hints. It's like there's that great sequence where the mom is listening in to see if Andy and him talk, and Chucky actually notices and then just acts like a normal doll, and it even closes in on his face and shows him going to sleep as if it's a human being and not just a doll that's, stationary. So that was interesting too.
Well, yeah, and same, like, all of the sort of like more ominous tone that makes its way into the movie, it's all really through like implied camera vocabulary. None of it is really seen. You like maybe you'll hear like footsteps,
or like when the mom walks in and they're sitting facing each other. And they're just, you're like, was a conversation happening here? It's just a very creepy, ominous image.
Or when the babysitter puts Chucky in the bed with Andy, and then she comes back out and the news is on.
And he's just sitting there.
He's just sitting there watching
chilling.
the news. Yeah. So it's really interesting that, the visual language for the film is all sort of like POV imagery from the point of view like of the doll as he's like moving around, like, and it's very like down below because the doll is so small.
Right.
And I think it's a huge accomplishment that like they make a doll of that size like genuinely physically intimidating.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that the camera work here is like a huge part of that, where like you get that. I mean, it's using a lot of slasher techniques. Again, the POV we talked about on our Halloween episode, and it's been in quite a lot of slasher stuff that we've talked about. But just the way that they use imagery that already freaks us out,
right?
But they use it in just sort of like a smaller, cuter, more disarming context.
Yeah.
But then you still see that the results are, even though, it's on a smaller scale, the results are still horrifying. Like when he eventually kills people, like it's pretty vicious and brutal.
Yeah.
In ways that, again, I think you're already disarmed, I think, by sort of like the look and the premise of all of this. Like it's a little fucking Cabbage Patch looking motherfucker.
Yeah, exactly.
You're like, what can
Just
that
out
thing
for
do?
vengeance.
And then all of a sudden he's like slicing ankles off, or he's like electrocuting someone until their eyes are bleeding, or like, like it's just,
or even when it gets to that eventual point, the voodoo doll, that fucked me right up. Bone breaking is really something that gets me. So, and
I remember, that's one of the few ones I can remember as a kid is, like the him going back to like his voodoo teacher and like snapping his leg, just and
they outright show it, and it's a pretty brutal sequence.
Yeah, well, and I mean that also maybe we could get back for people who maybe haven't seen the movie. The opening, the reason that there's anyone in this doll at all in the first place is the opening prologue of this film, which is really kind of like unnecessary, but it's such a batshit prologue that it's crazy that they put it in at all.
And plus, I love the performance. What's his name again?
It's Brad Dourif.
Brad Dourif. His performance is great, even pre-Chucky. Like he's got this long hair and this trench coat, and he's just very spastic and like you don't know what the next thing he's gonna do is. And
he's very unpredictable and violent, and kind of, I mean, they're trying to make him like a psychopath basically,
right? Yeah.
And he's running through the kids store, and he's basically getting killed by the cops, and his one buddy abandons him in there, and then he satanically voodoos himself into a children's doll.
Which is such a great sequence too. This whole like all the clouds just start coming and give me the power, I beg of you. It's just so epic.
Yeah. So then when the mom goes and buys the good guy doll for her child, she ends up buying the one that exact doll.
Unfortunately,
yes.
I guess it's also too. She gets it off the black market, if you will, because she gets it off of a bum in an alleyway.
Yeah, the guy who like presumably probably stole it while the while the store was like being looted or something like that. That's what like the assumption, I guess. But yeah, I just think that this is a really like it's a unique twist on like a horror slasher film. Yeah. To like just make the actual character, like a small children's toy. And the way that it interacts with the larger themes of the movie of, like a working class mom taking care of her only child kind of deal, and how obviously that child is going to be a little bit lonelier because, it doesn't have, as many people in its life.
Yeah.
And then Andy obviously latches onto television. He latches onto this toy that he sees on television.
Right.
And
I mean, now the toy's talking to him.
And then you introduce that toy into your home.
Yeah.
And a serial killer is inside of it.
Yeah. So now he's making friends with the wrong people.
Yeah, and what's amazing is how I think that Charles Lee Ray is what the serial killer's name is, which I read was modeled after Charles Manson, Lee Harvey Oswald or whatever, and one other famous
I
killer.
think there's a I know who you're talking about.
But it's pretty amazing to me that his character just immediately is okay with his situation, and the first thing he does is just like very creatively manipulate the child into doing what you want it to do.
He really seems like
he gets into that world
very
pretty fast.
Smart too.
Yeah.
Like he had his plan already formulated in a way. He knew exactly how to manipulate Andy. It's interesting because you'd think that he would just be like a purely violent entity, right? Where it's like he gets in, he just looks for opportunities, and then he starts, doing whatever he needs to do. But he really does take his time and really tries to get into Andy's
He's
head.
very sneaky, and he's very he's very manipulative. He gets Andy to skip school and walk him all the way.
That gave me such anxiety as an adult now watching that scene. I was just like,
Is someone on the subway gonna be like, child, where are you going?
Pick this kid up and get him home. Like when he gets off the train and he's just in like this New York like ghetto area, and then he walks into an even more terrible dystopian looking area, and you know that it's just like a drug house and all that, and then he goes, I need to take a tinkle. And I'm like, go home, kid. You say tinkle. Yeah. You shouldn't be here.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the doll is making its way over to the... you assume that it was like his hideout where the buddy who abandoned him in the opening scene is there. And he basically explodes him in the house.
Yeah, he leaks the
gas.
Does a gas leak and then has the
guy
freaks him out
him.
so that he shoots it. So he technically kills himself, I guess. But it's an elaborate death that you figure that Chucky would just go in, stab, whatever. But he had the whole. It's almost like he wanted more. A bit more of a powerful revenge for his friend.
He's for being so physically, I guess, what's the word here? For being physically outmatched by adults, like all the humans that he's killing, he really does find creative ways to knock them off.
Yeah, absolutely. What I find interesting too is,
which I actually think is what makes those the violent scenes like fun to watch, because you're watching someone have to like figure out
how he's gonna do it as a 3 foot tall character.
Exactly. How if you're like this little tiny thing are you gonna like kill full grown adults?
Which is funny because that leads to like the first kill, which is he has to get on top of the counter in order to do it. So that's what gives him away.
That's when he pushes the babysitter out the apartment
and he
window,
uses a little toy hammer from the set that the mom buys the kid too. So it's humorous in a very dark way.
Well, yeah, because that's funny when the cops are doing the crime scene and they're leaving, and they take like the little tiny like 4-inch hammer and they put it in the little evidence bag, and he's like, I think we've got our murder weapon, and the guy's like, what?
Yeah, it's great. Speaking of the detectives, I actually really enjoyed the detective's arc believing in this doll. Because he's of course at first he's just the typical cop. He's like, no, a doll didn't kill anybody. But just as the story goes on, he even gets to a point where the mom starts to go to him and say that it's happening. Yeah. And for a second he's like, okay, I'll listen to you. And then he goes, no, wait, I'm rational. I'm rational. I think rationally. No, this is bizarre, and I'm not listening to it. And then as it goes, it just exposes. It gets exposed to him, and his reaction's actually pretty funny in a way, and then it just gets purely violent. I mean, that sequence where they're going through the car, and he's strangling him, and then he burns Chucky with the lighter from the vehicle, and then it like does the car huge flips, crash.
Yeah, and then you see Chucky's little feet run away.
Oh yeah, so it's got once again there's this mix of like. Because that almost gives this sense of innocence and a little bit of like cuteness.
Like in another context, it would be cute, but in this one, it's horrifying.
This time, you know that thing's out to kill you. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, well, and I mean, that's after Chucky has finally revealed himself. But I think one of the scariest scenes in the movie is the scene where he reveals himself. Is the scene where he's finally pushed. Because
with the mom?
Because the whole point is he's kind of been pushing things with Andy, and he's been letting Andy take the fall every single time for it. Like when they finally find that Andy skipped school and they like uncovered him at an explosion in a ghetto, they were like,
"It's not looking good for old Andy."
Yeah, what's up, Andy? And Andy is like yelling at the doll, being like, "Come on, like tell him, like you need to not leave me holding the bag, man. Like, come on, what's going on?"
I thought we were bros, man.
Yeah, and you can see the mom's pain when the psychiatrist is like we should keep Andy. Like, and I mean, she was just at work. She was gonna pick him up after school.
Yeah,
and so the mom comes, is coming home and realizes that her kid is being kept in psychiatric, violent psychiatric help, basically.
Yeah.
And it's really sad when she has to leave him there, and she has to bring the doll home though, and when she brings the doll home, this sequence where she is just kind of like,
I love this.
She doesn't believe it, I don't think, but she yells and she's just like, I need you to talk. I need you to help me out.
I think I agree with you. I don't think she like believes it, but I think there's a part of her that just trusts her son so much to this point that she's like, why would he be still holding on to this lie?
Yeah, exactly.
Doll,
I agree.
fucking talk, and I love that there's like this trust within her son that makes her just kind of go to the bizarre point where it's like, maybe this doll is alive, just like, for a second.
Well, because she would rather believe anyway that the doll is talking and that her kid isn't lying than that her kid is crazy, because everything we saw leading up to that, the kid seemed pretty mature and the kid seemed pretty like aware of things that were happening. Like he had never previously revealed, a sadistic or
the changes occurred the moment they got the doll.
Yeah, and then he's blaming it on the doll. So the scene where she brings Chucky home and she's just yelling at the doll, being like, talk to me, like say something. And then that classic, like, it's in the house, it's been in the house the whole time. Perfectly calibrated suspense of when she finally goes to the box to see if there's anything on the box and the batteries fall out, and she realizes she slowly walks over to the doll and pulls out the back to be like, we never put the batteries in it, but I've seen it talking in the way it's supposed to talk. So she knows that it's been, in use, but it has been strategically in front of everyone but Andy, acting like how the doll is supposed to act. Yeah. And then with Andy being Charles Lee Ray.
Yeah, what we're about to see.
And then
I love too that they fake it out first. Like, well, not fake it. That the doll is a killer, but they fake it out for the mom once more, where he turns and he goes, "Hi, I'm Chucky," and then she drops it. Yeah. And then she looks into the couch again, grabs it again, just to be like, what was that? What the fuck was that? And then the fireplace moment is where everything kind of just blows up, right?
Yeah, because as soon as and I gotta say the design of the doll and the animatronics when he eventually switches are unbelievable. They're so convincing and they're so well done. And they're
I was
mostly
actually
used,
waiting for that. I wasn't sure if it was still going to be. I kind of forgot how it looked.
But like, the way that they make his eyebrows go down, the way that instantly they change the shape of his face to make it look evil.
Life. Like it's alive. It's no longer this doll. It really does make your brain think the way that it's
and it works with the premise of the movie, which is that as the longer he's in the doll's body, the more human he's becoming inside the doll. And then so when the doll starts doing more human facial interactions, like his brows start to furrow, his face starts to take on like this evil glee to it.
Gritting his teeth.
And he's so angry when she finds out. He's like, "You stupid bitch!"
Like he thinks of every derogatory term for a woman and just throws it at her, basically.
Yeah, and then he starts like biting her arm.
Yeah, because at this point it's like he was close, and he knows that. So he really is pissed now that his plan has been totally foiled.
Yeah, he basically took manipulating Andy as far as it could go.
Yeah,
and when he starts like physically attacking her, it's pretty terrifying. And then again, the way that the glide cam moves as he's like running around the rooms and the POV shots that it takes on of him, eventually when he makes his way out of the apartment and goes down the elevator, they don't even show him, they just show the elevator moving down. But like your brain immediately is just like, he fucking touched that button, he's going down.
That's the best part is when your brain starts to just, take the missing puzzle pieces and place them, and it works perfectly. They do the sequences so that you're allowed to do that. It's very well done.
Yeah, well, because from what I understand...
and I also love how they have like a little kid, or maybe it's a midget that's running around in the halls. Like you'll see them for a split second.
Oh yeah,
like because they need to have Chucky run like every once in a while, so they couldn't have done it.
Yeah. And it's mostly in the wide shots because they do have scenes where he's standing still or when he's like moving slowly, like in the later scenes when he's creeping around the house with the slow feet movements. Like that's all like those puppeteering and stuff like that. But yeah, you're right. They did use actors and they used small children too when they were doing scenes where like Chucky's like running around a house and stuff like that.
Yeah,
or,
or the sequence where Andy's looking at Chucky climbing the stairs towards his cell.
Oh yeah,
both kind of funny just because once again you're watching this 3-foot doll climbing stairs ready to kill somebody, but also terrifying because for Andy that thing's just coming to kill him.
Oh yeah,
and Andy's putting on a fucking awesome performance in this cell scene where he's crying to the guard and saying like he's coming to kill me. It was a genuinely heartfelt moment for Andy. I was really concerned.
What it really looks like when like a young boy is like crying. Like
it was very good. He's very good in this.
Well, yeah, he's like, why does no one believe me? Yeah. And he doesn't understand at all. It's just
my soul.
He just believes in the doll. You know?
Exactly.
Poor Andy.
Poor Andy.
Yeah, and I was also going to bring up that because we've been talking about it quite a bit, but the choice to do the more like implied horror angle for the first half of this film for the majority of it was one that I think they made a little bit later in development, and I think it was because they realized kind of the limitations of the effects that they were doing.
Sure,
that like they had to choose their shots more carefully because they weren't being convincing. So they did that thing where it got started with Jaws for the most part, but like that thing of where you kind of just like. Something's there, but what is it exactly?
Right.
And this movie does that for a really, really solidly long time. But by the time they switch to effects shots, which is what we're going to talk about as we switch here over to the closer to the finale here, the effect shots are really well done too. So it looks like they just like strategically saved their budget for the back half of this movie where, he eventually makes his way into the actual like mental hospital to go and take on Andy because he realizes that if he doesn't voodoo himself into Andy's body, that he'll be stuck in the doll. So he makes his way to Andy trying to do that, and he kills one of the doctors there. He kills all kinds of people. He kills obviously we already talked about he kills the voodoo guy.
Brutal
he
death.
tries to kill the detective, and that's finally when the detective I think finally starts
he's
believing.
like, I believe it now.
This whole movie is like people not believing it until they literally see it. And they even make a joke of it at the end of the film when we get to the big climax here because one other cop finally sees it and he's like, okay, I guess now I believe you. And then he's like,
but who's gonna believe me?
Exactly.
Especially now because nobody can even see the damn thing. We just blew it half to hell.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that the final set piece, it's really technically good.
Yeah.
For me, I was hoping for a little bit more of an ending that maybe hit a little bit harder on the themes and the characters a little bit. It does go a little bit typical slasher ending where they just
kind of kill it.
They just have to kill it, and then it keeps coming back, and they have to kill it again.
Although I do love that because watching this little doll that's just been like burned alive, limbs ripped off, he's like, I'm still gonna try to choke you. It's great.
Yeah.
Also, speaking of the first, what we think is the first death of Chucky, when he said the line where he's just like, friends to the end, right, Andy?
Oh,
and then Andy's awesome delivery where he's like, this is the end, friend.
Puts the match in the fireplace.
And I'm like, you badass 6-year-old motherfucker.
Yeah, I mean that bit where they
so good
because Andy actually kind of reveals himself to be a little bit resourceful in the mental hospital set piece, where like he's like tricking Chucky into like taking certain routes and avoiding him and whatnot.
Yeah.
And the final set piece too, they have to reveal a little bit of that resourcefulness where they have to take him down. Yeah, when they lock him in the fireplace and light him on fire.
Such a great
the image
moment.
of the doll just like melting and screaming, and they even
because Chucky has this very, very aggressive kind of like guttural voice in a way. So when he starts screaming, it just sounds like, just pure pain.
And the way that they've like morphed the look of the doll over the course of the movie, the whole point is that he's becoming more human-like inside the doll form. So they even make him a little bit more like fleshy and bloody and like by the time they get to the end. So it actually does look not just like plastic melting, like it looks like skin melting off.
Right.
And when he does come back after being burned and he's like all charred and like you can see his little teeth hanging out and like it just looks like what a person would look like if they were charred, basically, but really tiny and holding a little butcher knife coming to kill your ass.
Oh man.
So yeah, the set piece through the house is actually quite scary as well, and same with, and I mean the whole premise of the movie I find just scary. I think it works a little bit less hard on me as an adult than it did as a child, mostly because again, my your brain's not fully developed to like see that kind of, and I mean I've seen so many horror movies and slasher movies at this point that I now have a context for where these images come from, even though I do think it's really effective to translate this into a completely different idea and a different physical form and stuff. So it's like it's pretty effective horror filmmaking, even if it's not like particularly unique horror filmmaking in that sense. They've just found a way to translate it to their own premise, which is just a pretty solid premise. Because again, I found myself less scared, I think, by like the physicality of what was really happening and more scared on a level of that's a fucking children's doll. Like that's just a scary idea.
Exactly.
That's something that you so innocuous and innocent that you is so casual in your life and you let into your home,
and something
that all
that
of a
sudden
it would just
automatically loves too. You know what I mean? Like there's no, once you get your doll, like there's no, there's not a week of like, I'll get used to this doll. Children just, they love it right away. So that trust would be there as well. So that adds to the horror.
Yeah, so it's this thing insidiously making its way into your home under the guise of trust because your child is inherently more trusting. And then immediately betraying that trust in pretty goddamn vicious ways. I mean, when he's like slicing the cop's like calf with the knife and everything, you're like, oh. And I mean, eventually when they gun him down, he's even bloody by the time they gun him down. Like the shot of him finally like shooting him in the heart, it's like
just big old splatter of blood. And
all over the wall and stuff like that. I
love that too, though, is that they still have the weight of Chucky be like the same in that sense. So whenever he gets shot, he just flies like a rag doll.
I forgot about that bit. When they shoot him and he just like
just flies back. It's pretty comical in a way.
Again, he's pretty physically outmatched again by a lot of these people. Again, I find that's like where a lot of the creativity of the set piece comes from, is just figuring out the logistics of this really tiny weightless doll,
right?
And then he has to physically kill like grown people.
Exactly.
Who weigh like 200 times what he weighs. So. But I think maybe we'll enter the reductive rating round on this one for me. This one gets a pretty solid 4. I do think that the version that Mancini initially came up with sounds like it would be even more my speed. So I would even upgrade the film if that was the film that came out.
For sure.
Just because it seemed like even straight to the end, he had a very like thematic concern of the idea of children's advertising as a like home invasion, which is why eventually when this turns into like a home invasion slasher and you kind of get that vocabulary, like I think it would hit that home even harder if it just like maintained that theme a little harder. But really it mostly is in the subtext of the film, because the film is stripped down. Like it's like 90 minutes, right? Like it's like I feel like they really just stripped this movie down. So all of that stuff is there and I think it works. And they still made a good movie out of it, especially again for horror. The horror filmmaking here is pretty damn effective. And the performances are good. I think that the mom and Andy both make this a pretty emotional affair. Even though, again, a lot of it still is mostly kind of like on the periphery or in the subtext of the film. But that is just kind of like what elevates something that might be more typical. So for me, this is like elevated by all of that into something that's, pretty interesting. And I sit there and I do think about it. I sit there and I go, wow, not only is this like viscerally, physically terrifying, I also think, man, it's pretty crazy how that thing made its way into its home just because the child watches television in the first place. And I think back at all of the garbage shit that I probably loved as a kid that I made my mom buy, who probably couldn't afford it. And I was like, I just really
that you'd play with for like a week. And
well,
then,
exactly.
Like, toss, right?
There's definitely like a month of my life where I was super passionate about like Beyblades, and I look back at that now and I'm like, why?
A month though.
Yeah.
Just a month.
Yeah. And it's just like, why? Like, why did I possibly think that at one point?
Like that was gonna lead me to the answers of life.
Yeah, exactly. Like that was like life or death situation. Was, you know, if I was kicking other children's ass at Beyblades or not. And you look back at that now and you're like, why did my brain possibly come up with that? And you know, and I think especially now we're going to talk about it a little bit more as we angle into Small Soldiers. Mm-hmm. But like, I think this shit actually has just become more relevant. You know, that cynical fusion and blurring of like entertainment and advertising. Yeah, it really comes to a fold when we get into it in Small Soldiers. But it's really only become more prevalent with the rise of like, you know, people like Jake Paul or like, you know, YouTube personalities out there who like
basically like we have channels now that are dedicated to just selling merch.
Yes.
That's like, there's no real content. It's just
the content is the advertising.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that
we really are there.
I think that anxiety that this film comes from and really hammers home as horror, I think they were like almost ahead of their time on how like horrifying that really is. So I think the premise here in general of just envisioning children's toys and television and advertising and the way that affects children, and especially the way that it affects working class parents who don't have a lot of time to maybe pay attention to their children, how that becomes their kind of their motivating outlet. And then to stage that as like a home invasion slasher movie, I think is just an amazing premise that they do pretty damn effectively. You know, even if I wish they would hit some of it a little harder, it's just like good movie.
Yeah, I agree. Another one that did that, I think one of the only other films that we've covered that did the kind of the advertisement as horror in a way was Halloween 3 did it a little bit too, right? Just kind of with that commercialization and the masks that the kid have to get, and then they end up killing everybody.
No, you're right. Where like the corporation was almost like brainwashing the children to buy these Halloween masks, and then the Halloween masks kill them, basically.
Yeah. So that was that was interesting to see again, just kind of that theme. But yeah, I thought
and it was late '80s
great
as well, I think too. So
yeah, it was. So I thought this was great. It was nice to rewatch, and everything holds up. I was actually a little nervous at first because
I was too. The first time I rewatched it earlier this year for another podcast. But doing that rewatch, I was like, is this gonna hold up now that I'm like, I've seen all the horror movies?
Right, exactly. And there was also, because we were talking about how they kind of wait to show you the more advanced effects, like the animatronics and things like that. I couldn't remember if it was good or not. So I was like, are they not doing it because it's bad, or are they waiting? You know, are they saving it? And luckily they were saving it because they paced it out very well. And it was a really good choice. Believable. Yeah, because it's. I mean, that's hard to take something. You know, it's a 3 foot tall doll. That's very difficult to make horrific.
Well, do you know what visual effects artists talk about this a lot lately? Is the idea that when they were doing VFX back in the day, because of limitations, they just had to get creative with the way that they used them and the way that they chose their shots. Like, they just had to be really careful and to choose how they were going to frame a scene and how they were going to make it move and how, you know, to make the effect work. Right. And they say a lot of the problem now with VFX is that they don't have to do that. Like,
they kind of just rely on the effects.
So a lot of time they don't have to think about the shot very hard because they can just from scratch make the VFX go. Right. So a lot of VFX. So
it just makes for like less interesting filmmaking.
Exactly. Really. It's like the actual limitation made them have to do more interesting things in the filmmaking that they might not have otherwise done. So this is just a really good case.
David Lynch mentioned that as one of his kind of techniques, is that he would limit himself to certain things.
He does a lot of in-camera effects and stuff too.
Yeah. So, so I mean, I just thought this was a fantastic horror movie. Holds up, which was nice to see. Really was impressed with Andy's performance. One of the better children performances that I've seen. I mean, I basically just agree with everything you said. I will say that I agree that, especially that I would like to see the more psychological version of this film, because it also, that leads me to believe there's a lot more avenues they could go to in regards to the ending, in regards to how they do character development. the way that they did it here, it kind of seemed like it was only going to lead to one place, which is really Chucky being killed so that they can move on with their lives.
Yeah, it just kind of peters out a little bit, and you do wish that there was a little bit more there. And it's funny, when you go and watch the Child's Play sequels, they really didn't get much of a chance to do that either. They kind of just were like...
They went more in that satirical route.
They figured out the formula. Well, even Child's Play 2 and 3, which haven't done like that like super meta thing at that point yet.
That's true, yeah.
Like they still just kind of did the same movie over and over again. Like they kind of had to deal with the problem of we've already revealed Chucky.
Yeah. Because that's a big part of this film.
So we can't spend half the movie building him up and making you horrified of it.
Because most of this film is kind of like you're latching on to see when the mom finally figures it out and when the detective figures it out and all that.
Well, and they only have like one plot mission for him to do, which is to get into a child's body.
Right.
So like that's all he does for a lot of movies.
And that's for the next 3 films.
Yeah, so it's not until Bride of Chucky when they introduce Tiffany and they realize that, you know, there could be a life as like 2 dolls.
Yeah.
That things kind of actually get sort of interesting with the Chucky movies.
It's so crazy with like Seed of Chucky, where they basically become humans, so now they can reproduce. It's fucking crazy. I love this series though. But anyway, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed this.
Sweet. Well, that will wrap it up, I think, for Child's Play. We are going to be right back, and we are going to be talking Joe Dante's Small Soldiers.
Sweet.
The few.
We have met the enemy. He is big. He is fat. Yeah.
The proud.
He has revealed a weakness.
Alan, please, you have to help.
Major Chip Hazard wants a war. We'll give him a war.
The small.
Who you calling small?
This summer.
Babes at 12 o'clock.
Join the Commando Elite.
Gentlemen, those are reinforcements. Commandos, attack! No mercy!
Incoming!
Small soldiers.
Command post to Brick Bazooka, report.
It's just a flesh wound, sir.
You have to be crazy not to be scared.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Small Soldiers, the 1998 American, vaguely like sci-fi war film, but for kids.
Yeah.
Kind of like a Spielbergian domestic kids movie.
Yeah, I definitely had like some Spielberg vibes in that regard.
Well, I think Spielberg was originally tapped to direct this at one point.
Oh,
sort of. Joe Dante seemed like he was, because we've talked about Joe Dante before. Our big Gremlins episode was on him, and the thing about Joe Dante is that he always seemed to like. He was friends with Spielberg, and every time Spielberg like dropped a project,
he was like,
Joe Dante was like, yeah, I mean, I'm
available.
Yeah, I'm free. I'll do it. You know, whatever. And what's interesting is that every time Joe Dante, like Spielberg would be interested, and then Joe Dante would kind of do a bit of a satire on the Spielberg movie almost every single time he would do it, because Joe Dante is just it's funny how different he is from Spielberg. Like he is just he again came up drawing cartoons, and he was very obsessed with Looney Tunes, and he was a comic artist, and like
he does seem much more of that like satirical realm than Spielberg
exactly
does.
I mean, he loved like Mad Magazine, like that was his thing,
but it also seems like he still likes the family aspect, you know, so but he just pokes fun at it a little more.
Well, because I think he saw that Spielberg was doing like the American Family Unit kind of film, and then he went into it, and he was kind of like, I'm also interested in a lot of these themes of like the American Family Unit, and a lot of, I mean, he also had, you know, political ideas, and he had other kinds of ideas that he was interested in, and then he would really go into that, and he would try and like bend it to his will, basically. I mean, we talked about how Gremlins took the holiday spirit of Christmas, and you know, the fact that for a lot of people it's actually a lonelier, sadder time, and he made you know, a much grimmer movie about people being kind of afraid of the other. And then there's also a scene in that film that involves the girl talking about she doesn't like Christmas because her father dressed up as Santa and basically suffocated himself trying to come down the chimney. Which
of course Dante throws in his film, or I guess whoever wrote it. But
credit to Spielberg, apparently Dante, the studio didn't like that scene in Gremlins.
Not surprised.
But Spielberg actually did defend him and said, let him make the movie he's going to make. Like I'm because he's producing the film, so he has a voice. So Spielberg would let Dante do whatever, basically.
And I mean, that's a core part of her character in that film. So,
yes, I mean, it's really important. And you know, a part of his of the theme of the film, which is tackling this idea of maybe the American family isn't that great a lot of the time. Maybe they have strained relationships because of his dad's a failing part of a failing business.
I think.
Yeah, which is also part of this film where his dad has a failing toy store.
Yeah,
so he seemed like he was kind of just investigating the idea of what movies show the American nuclear family to look like,
happy-go-lucky.
Yeah, and then what a lot of American families were actually going through, which
really
is
struggle with, right.
Some parents had financial troubles, some kids had a bit of a rebel streak in them, which this kid does in this film. But largely the premise of this film, anyway, is that a company called Globotech,
of course,
great stuff. They start introducing advanced battlefield technology into consumer products, which just sounds like a great idea.
Always
sounds like a great idea. The funniest part about all of this is I got to mention off the top is that Joe Dante ended up directing this, and Spielberg left this to go and direct Saving Private Ryan.
Wow.
And this is going to become interesting as we further talk about this, because I read a great article by the critic Jonathan Rosenbaum, who directly compared those two movies back when they came out in 98, because they came out like back to back, like months apart from each other. And the critical reception to Small Soldiers was largely negative, and Private Ryan was like hugely positive.
Really? What was negative?
A lot of people just thought that it was like schmaltzy. Like they were like, whatever. Like it's basically just like a silly, crass Toy Story ripoff is kind of what like a lot of people ended up thinking of the movie. Like they compared it negatively to that. And it seemed like most of the people were just replying to kind of like the marketing of the film, because the marketing of the film, they did have like cross promotion with like,
which is
Burger
so fascinating
King
to have like because of what Joe Dante is talking about in this film, with commercialization and stuff like that. And then I remember when this movie came out, and I was like, even because of my stupid kid brain, right? I watched the movie. And then as I'm seeing the commercials, I'm like, well, they probably talk and walk at least a little bit. You know what I mean? So I'm like, I need to get every single one. I think I only had like one of them, but I remember, I specifically remember thinking that.
Was it Chip Hazard?
No, I think it was the big guy, the big Gorgonite. The big, he talks like this.
Oh, like the hunchback one or whatever?
Yeah. With the big round head and the one tooth, snaggle tooth coming out.
Gotcha.
I think that's the one I had.
Yeah, well, it's funny, when Joe Dante talks about this, he mentioned that when he was initially hired to make the film, they actually were okay with him making kind of like a bit of an edgier, aimed at teen version of the movie. And it wasn't until like partway through development that they actually got the promotional deals and the toy deals and all of this, and then they told him, you should make a little bit closer to children, and he basically said by that point it was too late. So the reason this does have seemingly more adult themes and violence in it is because he was already making the movie by the time that they told him he wanted to make a more children-oriented film.
When you also talk to like people our age that watch Small Soldiers, a lot of them say how it actually used to scare them, and how
it's kind of traumatizing. And
like I mean, I said it in our intro. This film, when I was a kid, for some reason, freaked me out more. I don't know why. It was just, I think it was the idea of all of these things with little knives just coming at me.
I don't know about you. I played with action figures a lot.
Yeah, me too.
So again, the idea of these action figures coming to life and attacking you, even though it's still done in a PG context.
Yeah,
I think the way that he just frames this, especially in the context of war visual vocabulary.
You also get to see the toys make their plans throughout the entire film, whereas with Chucky, there's like more of a mystery, right? It leads up to it, whereas this one is like straight off the bat, all right, gents, we gotta get these Gorgonites and kill them and whatever, and then the humans come involved, so they start attacking the humans, and there's that.
Well, I think that there's a combination here of he's making what feels like kind of like a children's Spielberg domestic type story, but then he's infusing it with like what is the violence of war film vocabulary. And I think that your brain just naturally would separate those two things, but he forces them to combine each other. So for me, it's a case of like, it's kind of freaky watching a toy. You're like, oh, it's cute, like it's tiny, whatever, and then seeing it like pull out a blade and draw blood at one point from Alan in the sink, or later on in the film when they start actually strategically doing war operations, and the violence just reminds you of other war films that are bloodier and more violent. Eventually, even when you see violence on the toys, like they've been humanized enough by the way that they move and the way that they
when they get cut in half or whatever, they're still going like, Sarge, I'm gonna be okay, Sarge. Like all this kind of,
and then they're putting his legs back on. He's like, "Bro!"
Yeah, like you can tell that they feel pain, or at least they think that they feel pain, and that's enough. That's enough for you to have a reaction to.
Well, yeah, and that's genuinely freaky.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you think about it. And then I think that we were talking about a little bit that, we wish Child's Play went a little bit deeper into some of like the actual themes of this. And I think that that's exactly what Small Soldiers does here. I think that this is a film actually about selling war to young boys.
Yeah. And it's even like Dennis. I think it's Dennis Leary
again.
Yeah,
this is like the third or fourth time we talked about Dennis Leary.
It's just out of nowhere, because he plays the Globotech, the CEO, and he has this great line when he's in the pitch meeting, and he says change the word violence to action. Kids love action.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's like they know what they're doing. They know what they're
because
selling.
The whole
these
premise
kids.
of these toys was that they were launching a new toy line, and that the one guy came up with a line of these sort of like sweet innocent monsters who have gotten lost, and the children are meant to play with them by helping them find their homeland, like welcoming someone in who you don't know and just being like, I'm going to help you figure out your life. And the kids are supposed to do research. They're supposed to learn. They're supposed to like read up on where these characters came from and what their abilities are. And Dennis Leary's like, did you just say learn? Yeah, fucking cancel that. What's next? So he immediately introduces the Commando Elite, which are basically just like these cartoon versions of the American military, which, by the way, I don't know if you noticed, voiced Tommy Lee as Chip Hazard is the main one, but and Tommy Lee, of course, pulling from like American action dad movies, basically.
Oh, is there another cool voice that I might...
The other voices, the rest of them, all voiced by actors from The Dirty Dozen.
Really?
Yep, all of them.
The one we just watched?
Yes. Yeah.
That's sick.
Yep.
Holy shit.
Jim Brown, who we talked about because he was on Running Man last week.
Yeah.
He was the pro football player turned actor.
Okay,
He is also the African-American guy from Dirty Dozen. Dude. And he is the voice of the toy here as well.
That's so cool.
It's because Joe Dante, I think originally he wanted the cast from Predator because those guys were they were supposed to be like the macho American military dudes.
Can you imagine if Arnie voiced?
That's what he wanted.
I would have fived the movie.
Yeah, so he eventually he reverted to Dirty Dozen instead, which is just like such a cutting critique of, again, just like the war movie, because to him he's saying, suggesting anyway, that the war movie has a part to play, or at least the way that, it's not saying like all war movies are inherently like pro-war movies or anything, but he's just indicting the idea of that some people watch war movies just for entertainment.
Yeah.
Well, and they introduce that dad character in the middle of the film who's setting up his home system, and he's setting up all of, he's just watching this war movie, and he has the line where he's like, I think World War II was my favorite war. And I'm like, your favorite fucking war? Are you kidding me?
I'm not fucking with you. I've heard people say that.
Died. So many people died.
Yeah. Now, obviously, when those people said that to me, I don't think they were like, I love that millions of people died. But just that idea is very odd.
Right. Well, yeah. And I think that's what... I don't think Joe Dante is saying that either. I think what he's getting on is just the way that war has been invited into culture as something that is like, it's just action. It's cool.
Right. Yeah. It's another story. It's just...
Exactly.
Something to latch on to.
And that's part of the premise here when he introduces the Commando Elite, who, they were like, they're just the guys who go out and kill things. That's their job. And they assume the best touch of this whole thing is that the Commando Elite's like literally because Dennis Leary is like, so we got the American good guys, and then we got the fucking freaky monsters that they vaporized.
Yeah,
done. Now go and
we have a franchise.
Yeah, go and sell these toys. And because they have just been bought by the parent company, which is a military-grade company that sells literal weapons, so now the company that is selling weapons to it's implied also not just to the American side but also to rebel groups and stuff that they're dealing on both sides. They are now selling children's toys, and they literally put military grade microprocessor chips into the toys so that they can
walk and talk.
They can walk and talk,
interact
and they can
with
do great things. Yeah, exactly.
Just fun, just good old times.
Just a good time, yeah. But the chips are so advanced that they latch onto
end up being munition chips too. So it's like specifically designed to be violent. Like it's like
they were chips meant to target for missile targeting,
right? Exactly.
That they were and that they were meant to be. They're like, it's not artificial intelligence, it's actual intelligence. The chip was designed to like learn where it was supposed to go and then like find its own route there. So it's creative also. Yeah. So they put them into the programming of the dolls, and the dolls programming is on one side to just completely eliminate the monster characters by any means necessary. Yeah. And the other ones are supposed to be the pacifists. They just like nice just little guys
and try not to get killed.
And they're just seeking their homeland.
Yeah.
And the chips obviously exacerbate both of those missions.
Isn't it kind of odd too, though, how when they're writing the programming, they still made the Gorgonites like passive?
Yeah.
Like they were like, even with his CEO brain, he was like, let's still have these guys hunt down passive enemies that aren't doing anything other than trying to find their own home.
Right,
so
like the monsters are literally not doing anything, and the American military is literally predatory. Like just hunt them down and murder them viciously. Basically,
they're just not meant to be here. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, Joe Dante is like, at this point, there's no subtlety about it anymore because but watching like the little American Army military toys like literally assume actual military tactics is what freaks me out. Because there's a part,
or even when they get creative, like when he walks in on the sink scene and they have the thing tied up like above the sink, lowering into the sink
the garbage disposal,
the garbage disposal, and you're like, that took creativity. You know, that took thought to not just kill the thing,
they were literally
but to
stringing him up like a pig and dropping him into...
and pulling him into the thing. Like, that's elaborate. That's some Dr. Evil shit right there.
Like in another context, you're just watching like a snuff video from, you know...
exactly. But it's toys.
Yeah. Like, it's genuinely... like, and Joe Dante is like aware of all of this. And again, the way that he has just these action figures like literally ingest the brutal policies and tactics of the military. And I love the line too where the one guy's like, how could they be dangerous? Everything on them is like standardized, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, but one of the standard products was like literal munitions grade devices. So just, you know.
Another thing with the violence is even that same sink scene is where I think his name's Alan. The kid's name's Alan, right? Alan, he takes one of the soldiers and he puts him in the sink and turns that blade on, and that soldier ends up dying.
Yeah,
like legitimately dying, and they have a ceremony for it.
Yeah, I think he crawls his way out.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is until that point, it's only the Gorgonites versus the military, and that's what sets the military off to be like, all right, well, fuck humans too. You just killed one of my soldiers.
Well, yeah, because obviously they're like they're helping my enemy, so therefore we are also going to take them on as well.
So it's just such a progression that's very interesting.
Well, and they're always going like, no mercy, like we're gonna kill them all, Gorgonite scum, like no surrender. And there's also a great scene in this too where the Archer, the head Gorgonite toy, or voiced by, I think it's Frank Langella, he is also scrolling through human history at one point on the computer, and he sees like Lincoln, and then he sees like Lyndon B. Johnson and Kennedy. And then he hits Vietnam and Hiroshima and, Hitler and World War II and everything. So again, it's almost like the toys are learning from our own actions.
Yeah.
So Joe Dante
might not be the best thing.
No, it's like Joe Dante is skewering the idea that like we have taken real human violence and then commodified it into, something fun and cool in the form of action.
Yeah.
And then watching how scary it is when we program our toys and have something, again, similarly to Child's Play, and it's why these pair well together, something insidious makes its way into the American home.
Right.
You know,
that's supposed to be innocent as
all
well.
of those things that are happening around the globe that the military is doing have found their way home, and then all of a sudden we're like, what the fuck is this?
We want that in other places, not here.
Not here. This is terrifying. Even tiny.
They only have little knives, and I'm scared as hell.
Well, and there's one amazing joke where they play I can't remember. I think they play Spice Girls, right?
Yeah, they call it psychological torture.
Yeah, they call it psychological warfare. But no joke. I can't remember exactly who it is that they reference in that one, but that is actually at the time a real military tactic, where they would go into places and they would blast obnoxious music, whether they wanted it to be like death metal music or whether they wanted it to be like just really like corny pop music or whatever. And
the pop music would have got me. The death metal would have been like lock and load.
Yeah.
Let's fucking do this.
But in the 80s and 90s, this was a real military tactic, was to torture people with music. I mean, they would eventually do that to actual like torturing just individual people, like where they would like
put the headphones on.
Well, yeah, so they couldn't sleep, so they would just every something like 90 seconds, it would just like blast them with 10 seconds of death metal.
Boys, and then back at it.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
So the fact that these toys are, again, just like taking real military American tactics and then applying them and using them in this really tiny, cutesy context where you're like, oh, like it's actually kind of like, like again,
it's interesting to see them apply it, right?
And it just
on a small scale.
It fucks with your brain because you're sitting there and going, oh, it's like, it's kind of cute, like it's clever, like it's it's cool watching these little tiny things ride the little cars over the lawns. You're like, oh, that's just nice. And then you watch them draw blood, or you watch them do something that's genuinely viscerally horrifying, and you're like, oh,
oh, never mind.
And this is a real deal children's movie. That's the difference between this and Child's Play, is that like this was actually marketed and seen by children, whereas Child's Play was an R-rated movie for parents.
Right.
So again, I think
that's
probably why
the violence it shows, the violence that's implied is kind of almost the same.
It's pretty goddamn similar.
It's like, it's just this time you're seeing more toys get dismembered than humans.
Yeah, which is why I assume is why it was probably scarier for you, because I think you were watching a movie that otherwise
should be an adult movie in a sense.
Well, yeah, I think
the aesthetic.
I think you were just watching a movie that the vocabulary made sense. You were like, yeah, this is a kids movie. This looks like other kids movies.
Yeah, there's a kid right there, and he's on an adventure, and it's all there. You know, he's got a family.
And otherwise, this looks like other kids movies that I've seen before. Exactly, and then Joe Dante just really brings it. And again, the way that he so easily switches between modes from like shots moving through a domestic household to then all of a sudden using the Flight of the Valkyries cue and having Tommy Lee Jones's little toy doll rush in on the helicopter straight out of Apocalypse Now. He's referencing Apocalypse Now in a children's movie.
Right.
Like, what the fuck, dude?
Yeah. And I also love the needle drop of when they crash through the garage and War comes on.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever. Whoa. Good God. You know, like, and once again, it mixes that thing, because at this point, you know that these military guys are just after blood, you know?
Yeah.
But yet they crash through the garage, the War needle drop happens, and you get this kind of fun sense again.
Oh, yeah,
like, I'm having a great time, but everyone's in danger.
Well, yeah, no, totally. It's so disarming. Again, when he pulls back and he shows you just like a wide shot of just something like this little intricately detailed vehicle that a little toy made up, and you're like, oh, that's funny. Like, that's just again the same way that like Child's Play is kind of funny in that sense. Like inherently, this is a funny idea, seeing something like this on a small scale.
Yeah. Exactly.
But yeah, then again, as the violence escalates, it becomes almost surreal, is what I kind of felt like, because both we've talked about the violence that's done to the toys, and then eventually the toys are like firing those little like corn cobs, or like taking real household blades. Like at one point they're
saws.
Yep, chainsaws and lawnmowers,
and they're launching them at them. Like,
oh yeah,
they're ready to kill.
Like, it's freaky. But then there's also a scene, for example, which again has its own kind of like surreal horror to it, where they bring the Barbies back to life.
Oh my God.
Kirsten Dunst is the girl next door in this movie, and she has a bunch of Barbies, and at one point the Commando Elite like literally Frankenstein them to life.
Yeah.
And
I love this sequence too because they do the whole like Frankenstein it's alive thing, and then they cut to the monster that is like the Frankenstein monster or the Gorgonite watching Frankenstein, and he says something like, I feel you, man. Yeah. Or something like that. That's such a good sequence of events. Very well thought out.
Well, yeah, and he literally, for the reanimation scene of the Barbies, he literally stole the music from Bride of Frankenstein when they make the Bride of Frankenstein.
Cool, very cool.
And the one they're watching on TV is one of the creature features from back in the day. I don't think it's Frankenstein. It has the one with the one eye, because it's the little one-eyed monster, remember?
Oh, yeah.
He's the one watching the TV, and he's just like, hey, it's like your buddy. And the guy with the one eye is just looking, and he's just like, wow, someone else has like one eye out there. Like he feels less lonely watching that, which is just funny because that's what old monster movies were like too. Like Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah, they dealt with that kind of thing, right? It's loneliness.
It's one of my favorite horror movies of all time, specifically because it takes the Frankenstein story and it's just like Frankenstein is like a very inherently lonely character. And I mean, part of the original Frankenstein story is that he's our Frankenstein's monster. Fuck you.
Yeah. We know there's gonna be someone
out there. He's ostracized as the monster, and he has no idea what he's doing there, or what any of this does. He accidentally kills someone, and that's why everyone goes after him, and he has no idea that he's done that. Like he was just trying to be friendly. And the Bride of Frankenstein takes that loneliness, and it's like, what if he like really yearned for like a partner? So he brings the bride to life. Like they have someone for him, and it takes up all the way till the end of the movie before they bring the bride to life. The whole movie is just about how lonely Frankenstein is.
Oh, so it's literally like Frankenstein waiting for a love? Like,
yes.
Wow.
Well, and here's the thing.
Cool.
They bring her to life, and it's horrifying. Like she's screaming, she hates it. She doesn't like him because she's just like, why have I been born? Like
what is this?
Like she has the same experience that he did, where
but she didn't get a movie to get used to life.
Exactly. So he sees her as like his out for that loneliness, and she sees him as like the person who brought her into this terrible existence and hates him. And it's a really, really sad thing that happens in that movie. And so again, the way that Joe Dante, who clearly has an affection for monster movies and for kind of like the lonely guys, the outsiders, you know, he's taken that to be like, here's my lonely monster toys, and they just want to hide and find a home, and here they are being like actively pursued down using real military tactics used throughout the world.
Or moment rather with the Gorgonites is when Alan is telling them like what keeps going beyond each little section. Like they're like, what's that there? They're like, that's the road. And they're like, what's beyond the road? And they're like, the highway. What's beyond the highway? The countryside. What's beyond the countryside? And then Alan finally gets to the point where he's like, I don't know. And then they go, Gorgon. Like, as if they have hope. Yeah, they're so determined to get home that they're like, well, what's past that? What's past that? Oh, you don't know?
Yeah.
It's Gorgon.
There's like there's like an optimism there.
Yeah, they constantly have this optimistic trait about them, even when they're going through absolute hell and constantly being hunted down.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I also love that as with every Joe Dante movie, Dick Miller is in this movie. Dick Miller recently passed away. He's the guy who plays the truck driver.
Oh, okay.
He was in Gremlins too. He's like the old neighbor guy. Yeah. He's like the old neighbor guy who was funny because in Gremlins he's supposed to be like the xenophobic neighbor too, where he's just like fucking Chinese cars getting into my homeland or whatever. And in this one, I always like seeing Dick Miller because he was just such like a warm, charismatic presence, and Joe Dante always puts him in like kind of like the older,
the mentor
lovable man next door who just he's always playing like the working class guy next door. And in this movie he actually helps the kid out by giving him the military toys, which his dad refuses to sell because his dad believes in the idea that kids should not be playing with war toys.
And he nailed it.
Yeah, he ended up being right on that front. That's for sure.
Listen to your dad. Alan, come on.
And yeah, that's basically how the whole movie kind of unfolds, is that those war toys end up unleashing hell all over the suburb. And I mean, the big climax where like they're literally riding entire vehicles and like shooting like spiked things at people. And I mean, there's a whole set piece on top of the wiring and stuff too. And there's a bit where Kirsten Dunst.
That's one of the moments where you actually see the soldier stab.
Yeah,
Alan
Chip Hazard is like stabbing him in the hand.
Yeah, it has this this sharp pain that it gives you.
Yeah, well, no, it's really creepy because I mean, earlier in the kitchen sink one too, they take like that spinning blade to his hand,
right?
And again, just watching them like actually cut into a child.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Like it's actual violence against children.
Yeah, exactly. And another sequence that got me, and it's the military guys being destroyed, but yet it's still kind of
the lawnmower.
Some emotion.
The lawnmower, yeah.
Because afterwards you see them all just everywhere on the lawn, and they're like, some of them are in pain and they're like yelling and all this, and you're just like, Jesus, this really is war right now.
Yeah, well, because again, I think that's just
you're watching toys get killed, so you're just like, you wouldn't think that emotion would come out, but
no, I think that is our knowledge of just war movies,
right.
Acting there, because I mean there's so many references here. I mean, he's got the Dirty Dozen already, he's got Apocalypse Now, but he also does that bit where they all look at the Barbies and before reanimating them they go, a little bit of R&R, sir, which is like straight out of Casualties of War.
Yep.
So here I am thinking about a movie about like brutal rape in a children's movie.
I didn't mean to laugh. It's just the correlation between that and Small Soldiers is pretty funny.
Yeah, and again I think that's just a really intelligent idea that he actually explores through filmmaking.
Yeah.
That it's just, he takes children's filmmaking, he takes war filmmaking, and he combines you in a way that makes you think about it, because you don't really think about a lot of time when you watch war films is, you know, what is the larger like cultural context of a war film. There's a lot of great war films out there, a lot of war films that tackle the pain and violence of it and, you know, the historical context of it in certain ways, like Casualties of War. I mean, we've done war movies before and we will be doing them again in 1 week's time, actually. But I do think that his critique here of, for example, again, I'm going to return to Jonathan Rosenbaum's piece on Saving Private Ryan versus Small Soldiers, and what he pointed out was that Saving Private Ryan actually went on, even though it was a movie that was supposed to be like war is hell kind of deal, its lasting cultural legacy was to be like a dad movie that you watch on a Sunday and you're like, great actors with, you know, being men, doing the job, getting the things done, persevering. It's a movie that begins and ends with them like raising the flag up, you know, stuff like that. So it's just like so Jonathan Rosenbaum kind of went on a whole detailed thing on how like that movie is the kind of movie that Joe Dante is kind of satirizing when he does this, where he makes you think, and it's like he's not saying Saving Private Ryan is a garbage movie or anything. It's just that
it better not be.
Yeah. It's just that you know, a lot of the way that we introduce war films into the way that we consume pop culture is in a way where we don't think about the violence that much, and that this is a movie designed to make you think about the violence without actually even having a lot of it in there. So it's just like, it's a really effectively made critique of other people's filmmaking at the same time, as well as just being, you know, on itself an entertaining comedy and action movie. So
it still has all the like campy qualities that are fun in a more family oriented.
Well, and I mean,
film.
Joe Dante, again, as a satirist, he's just a naturally funny guy.
The Gremlins had a bunch of it too.
The Gremlins had so many, you know, despite the fact that, you know, that second Gremlins is really politically heavy, it's just like a complete cartoon Looney Tunes craziness.
Crazy.
Yeah, like it's jokes per minute in that movie is absolutely insane. And there's one here that I really loved where the mom, who is like a tennis person, when they start firing they're lighting the tennis balls on fire and launching them into the house to try to light the house on fire, which is horrifying.
It's just crazy.
Well, and the mom pulls out the tennis racket and starts hitting them back at them, and the dolls start lighting on fire and stuff like that, and the dad's just like, keep on working on that backhand or whatever he's doing. And
that's again just another example of that mix between like kind of funny because you're watching a
humorous
mom
for sure,
you know, taking that tennis ball, but you're also watching a fiery tennis ball attempting to take down the entire house.
Yeah, so take down the suburb, and then watching it used on the toys, which you are still humanizing as well.
Right. Yeah. I never realized how complicated this film really was.
Yeah, well,
when it came to the
just
themes.
how how in tune it is with the way that he's just like actually done the filmmaking.
Yeah.
Like again,
it balances well.
A lot of, even though there is a lot of like, not subtext theme stuff going on here in just the premise of the movie, the way that they, talk about putting the military grade chips into the toys and everything. By the time we hit the final stuff, like all of these themes are just in the images at that point.
Yeah.
Because really he's just making, a very literal story of this family fighting off an invasion of toys. And that is fun even when you're not thinking about the themes, but the themes are so like infused into it that like you can't, like they're there. Like that's what the whole movie ends up being about.
Yeah.
Again, it's kind of like the way that we talk about when it's our favorite way to do it is that it comes up with these ideas and makes you think about these things without having to say it. It's just like your brain naturally goes, why do I feel sad that like these little army toys are like on fire and screaming?
Yeah. And once they even have lines where they're kind of like, you realize that they've also just been
Joe
programmed.
Dante's a fucking genius.
Oh yeah, he's unreal. You realize that these things have also just been programmed to do that by us.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, this isn't the toys' fault. This is what they do. This is their life. This is all they know.
No, exactly. It's literally been modeled after a military weapons company.
Exactly.
Right? So its values have just been projected into the toys.
Right.
Which is just it's pretty rewarding to watch overall.
And then I also love how just to wrap up kind of how they connect the beginning with the CEO and how they have how he deals with the aftermath.
Oh,
he
the
just
ending.
gets out of the helicopter
amazing.
and starts paying people off to shut their mouths. And he's so rich that everybody looks at the paycheck and just goes, "All right, I guess we're moving on with our lives.
Yep.
This is enough for me."
Well,
and I just loved that they were like, "Yeah, this is kind of a painting a picture of what happens in real life. Really, this violence and destruction happens, and then money can make it go away."
Yep.
So it's just, and then the added addition of, all right, well, we'll keep the toys, just add a couple zeros on them, and we'll make them military weapons. And you're just like, that's all it takes. That's the difference. The difference is a couple zeros. Unreal.
Yeah, the ending to this is quite amazing because everyone is basically being like, what are you going to do to make me forget this? Think I'm going to forget this? Just check. And he's like, whoa, all right, sweet.
Just rolling them out.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, well, because again, all of this violence was happening in real world contexts around the world.
Yeah.
And none of these people cared. They were very cool just watching the war movie at home and being like, sick.
Yeah.
I love this shit. It's so good.
America, baby.
We love it. And then all of a sudden they see it on a really tiny scale and they're like, that's fucking horrifying and scary as shit. And then immediately money just makes them forget about all of it.
It again.
But yeah, and not only does he say that he's gonna make the toys military, he says the line, "I know some rebels in South America who are going to find these toys very entertaining," which could mean one of two things. One, it just means that he's going to use them to go and fight, like Latin American wars.
Yeah.
Which is like horrifying in and of itself. Or two, he's selling them
to like terrorism or terrorists or whatever.
Like to rebel groups. He's arming rebel groups to do coups, which is what America historically has done in Latin America.
Yeah.
So then you're getting into a case of
and it's one line.
Yeah.
It's just a throwaway.
Yeah, it's just the end of the movie.
Yeah.
It's just like,
I also love it's a great, Dennis really has a fantastic final scene where he just wraps it up so neatly. Where he looks at all the destruction before he gets back into his fucking Globotech helicopter and he just goes, "It's a shame. This would have made a great commercial."
Amazing.
Dante, baby.
Amazing.
So good. Did Dante write this too?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man. I love you, Dante.
Yeah.
He's so funny. He's unbelievably
I'm looking
funny.
at it now, and maybe he didn't write this one.
Oh, no?
Oh, wait, hold on. I'm looking up. But he worked on a producer as a lot of his stuff, I think, too. So maybe we shouldn't be giving Dante all the credit here. But
regardless, whoever wrote it, it's all good. It's fucking
absolutely.
Fantastic.
I mean, it does fit in Dante's wheelhouse. This is very similar satirical attitude
reminded me
that
of
Gremlins
for
did.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we did a whole episode way back on Gremlins and Gremlins 2, which is still our biggest episode that we've done. A lot of people really like that episode. So, and we talked a lot about, again, how how Dante was just a really expert satirist and comedian who found really deep themes into what are otherwise children's stories and found filmmaking ways to get it in there. So this is just another example of that. The fact, though, that Small Soldiers was pretty much critically hated, and
can't believe that.
And still even now, people seem to
have a 2.9 on Letterboxd or something.
Yeah,
that's insane.
Yeah, so
they're all wrong.
People give it the pity 3. It's fun, and I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, no.
This is unbelievable.
It's so good.
This is so good.
It's so fun too. He found a way of throwing all of these very mature themes at you in this extremely fun kids movie. That balance is hard.
Well, I remember watching this as a kid on VHS, and I honestly did expect what I thought would be maybe an E.T. meets Toy Story kind of thing. And I watched Toy Story all the time. I had a Woody doll. I love Toy Story. And instead I found myself traumatized by what is genuinely, I think, one of the most insidiously and sharply written satires on children's films and war films.
And war, yeah.
That I've genuinely ever seen.
It's what was really cool is when I watched it as a kid, I didn't know why it scared me.
Yeah,
and now I know why it scares me, and that's just fascinating. And I had quite a trip with this rewatch.
Yeah, so I guess we'll probably enter the reductive rating round on this one. For me, this is a pretty high 4.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta say, Joe Dante, the absolute legend. You gotta love him. He's so interesting, and every time he tackles one of these movies, he always finds really interesting themes to fit in. Again, we haven't talked about it yet, but Tom Hanks in The Burbs as well, which is his version of a Hitchcock
cool.
Rear Window type thing, the neighbors
Dante
spying.
Doing that'd be cool.
Yeah, well, because Tom Hanks keeps spying on his neighbors, and he keeps not doing anything else, and he thinks that he's found himself in a conspiracy where his neighbors might be murderous cannibals, basically.
Okay.
And it just wrestles with the desire of looking at someone who's just moved in, looking at an outsider, and
almost wanting adventure in some way, or?
Almost wanting them to be killers so that he could return his town back to normalcy. Mostly because he's bored. Again, it's very Rear Window in that sense, where it's just the guy looking to dream up entertainment for himself in a way that reaffirms what he already believes, which is that these weirdos keep moving into my suburb, and I want it to stay the same. I want to keep the status quo the same.
Yeah.
So again, Dante just always seemed interested. He seems himself like a bit of a weird guy, so it's very possible he identified with weird people and outsiders, and he always finds ways to explore that in his films. And I think that this is one of his better, most, I think, viscerally effective versions of it. I love Gremlins 2 is probably still my favorite Dante film, just because that one is I'm gonna call
it's
it
just balls to the wall.
It's just galaxy brain Dante.
He had no barriers.
He got full carte blanche to do whatever the fuck he wanted on that one. So
exactly.
And this one, he is still kind of collaborating with the fact that, again, they had to do Burger King cross promotions for this movie.
Yeah.
And again, that's why I think everyone saw it as a crass corporate product.
Which is so interesting, because the entire time he's poking at that.
This is such a cutting film of corporate products, and being the relationship that corporations have with our military and how horrifying that is. Literally, this is an indictment of the military industrial complex in a children's film. Right. If anything, that's an insane accomplishment.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And the way
to still make it fun.
Yeah, and for this to just be a genuinely funny movie, watching little Tommy Lee Jones stand in front of the puzzle piece American flag, giving little war speeches and stuff like that. It's so cute.
I love the scene where they give each character's name and kind of personality.
I'm the demolitions expert and stuff.
It's
it's funny, and we'll talk about it next week when we're going to be doing war films here. But he directly ripped that from the Dirty Dozen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So this gets a pretty high 4 for basically everything that we've said. We don't need to reiterate a whole lot of this. I think this is just a really entertaining, viscerally effective film that is both critiquing children's films and war films, and at large the military and corporations, and how all of those cultures bleed together in the American lifestyle.
Yeah.
So goddamn, dude.
Yeah, like, that's insane.
That's insane to think about.
Only Dante, baby. Yeah. Only Dante.
So again, if you haven't seen this film in a long time, or maybe you've only ever heard of it in the context of people you know have said they don't like it, I would highly recommend just watching this film for yourself.
Highly recommend.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's incredibly well done.
People need to go to bat for this a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think, it seems that the review itself of what most people were saying is kind of wrong. I mean, I get that they did end up doing a lot of commercialization. They had toys, they had promotion, they did get my ass to buy one and all that. But it's...
If anything, that should have just got you to think more about it.
Yeah, the movie itself is at least tackling those things. Yeah. And, was Dante going to be able to escape the inevitability of commercialization of his movie about action figures? I mean, obviously toy companies were going to be like, we need toys, it's just, it sucks, but that's the reality. And yeah, I'm going to give it a 4 as well. I don't really have too much to add. I feel like we've made the points here. Dante is a fucking genius.
Yeah.
His ability to mix these very adult themes, but hide it in this kid aesthetic is really
or just behind movie cliches.
Impressive.
Yeah. Stuff like Spielberg movies and
stuff that he knows that and then he's kind of playing off of that, and that's very impressive. I also like to just say that the effects work was really well done. I didn't think it was going to be as seamless this time as it was, but is it CGI that they do at certain points?
They attempted to do it, I think, mostly with puppeteering.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it is.
But there is quite a bit of CGI enhancement of the puppeteering.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
So they eventually went. A lot of the Commando Elite stuff was eventually CGI'd, but you'll see a lot of the Gorgonites. They do just look like action figures.
Yeah.
But it's because they are required to do less crazy things.
Yeah, they're not doing as much heavy action oriented stuff.
And the ones that are, like the guy who jumps around and spins around and stuff, he's CG. But a lot of the Commando Elites are CG because they were they had to recreate war movie set pieces basically. And there are a lot of set pieces in this movie.
Yeah,
of them, the bit where they all join into the giant vehicle and chase them on the bikes across the town. And the way that he films it, it's genuinely like a car chase sequence.
Yeah.
And then they fly over and the toys land in to the ditch and explode.
And I love the scaling too, because it shows him riding his bike and then this little toy just hanging on by a rope trying to get to the bike. It's great comedy. But I'm gonna give it a 4. I gotta dive into some more Dante because I have loved Gremlins. I've loved this. I haven't seen The Burbs, so maybe that's the next one I'll knock off
The Burbs I think is his next biggest one.
Yeah.
But his other one I find the most thematically interesting is actually Matinee, which I talked briefly about on the Gremlins episode, and I brought it up also on the Tingler episode that we did.
John Goodman's in Matinee.
Yeah, John Goodman. Yeah, because John Goodman literally plays a traveling film showman type person who tried to do that 4D experience, like that Tingler, where we watched the Tingler, where the Tingler is set loose in the theater. But he does it in a way where he is trying, and it's Joe Dante's love. He infuses his love of movies into it, where this showman tries to recreate an actual nuclear apocalypse in his theater. He makes all of the people in the theater basically think that war has happened. And then when everyone comes out, they're all going into the bomb shelters and stuff like that, and everyone comes out and they have this moment of catharsis where they're like, oh, it's not happening, but all of the jets are flying over top and stuff like that, and
Holy shit. That sounds awesome.
So the way that, again, that he infuses showmanship and movies and corporations and military all together, Matinee also really does that as well, which came out just a few years before Small Soldiers. So clearly that was his headspace.
Yeah, he just has a fascination with those two things, it seems.
Yeah, I think he just saw a serious contradiction there in American culture, and he wanted to use his movies to, kind of get at it.
Yeah, for sure.
So again, we'll both highly recommend Small Soldiers here.
Yes, rewatch it.
That will wrap it up, I think, for this week. That was... Shit, what was it? What were we just talking about? We were talking Child's Play, 1988, and 10 years later, Small Soldiers, 1998. I think in 1 week's time, as we've mentioned a little bit over the course of this show, we are going to be doing some Men on a Mission films, some old school 60s war films, kind of the ones that, going back to World War II.
Killing them Nazis.
one directly referenced in this. This always accidentally happens where there's some sort of direct reference.
It's crazy.
And I don't intend for it. I literally don't. Like, I literally just put Dirty Dozen because I knew we had something we were going to hit a little later on. I knew I wanted to get it in there. Had no idea that the cast of the Dirty Dozen voiced the Small Soldiers guys until I read about it.
That's awesome.
And again, same way that Jim Brown. This 3 weeks now of Jim Brown because he was in Running Man. He was in Small Soldiers, and now he's going to be in Dirty Dozen.
That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah. So just the way this is working. So either way, 1967, directed by Robert Aldrich. We're going to be talking The Dirty Dozen, also starring, lots of great American actors at the time: John Cassavetes, Charles Bronson, Jim Brown, and then we're going to be pairing it with 1 year later, 1968, I believe, and that is Where Eagles Dare. This one starring Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood. Both of the two, I think, most popular and most influential men on a mission films, which is what the genre would eventually be called, which is just a bunch of... It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a bunch of different personalities of men gathering together to do some sort of mission. It now has a bit of a broader genre where it's not just war movies. Like, technically, like, heist movies can be men on a mission movies, all kinds of... I mean, there's one called Kelly's Heroes that's literally... a men on a mission heist movie, but it's still a World War II movie, but they're doing a heist behind enemy lines in World War II.
Interesting.
Yeah. So like they started fusing that together a little bit. So that's what we're going to be talking about next week for you guys over on Patreon. That's again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast for all our bonus listeners. That's what you're going to get. And in 2 weeks time, we are going to be back and we are going to be with a special guest and we are going to be talking 90s. I believe, I haven't seen either, so he might have to clarify for us, but I believe they're both erotic thrillers. So sort of like Basic Instinct territory.
Interesting.
Like kind of horror and thriller 90s? And they're 90s. So we know in
for some batshit crazy stuff.
Well, yeah, so we're going to be doing To Die For, 1995, directed by Gus Van Sant. And that one stars Nicole Kidman and Matt Dillon, Joaquin Phoenix.
Gus Van Sant. That sounds very familiar.
Big name. Good Will Hunting, My Own Private Idaho, Elephant, Drugstore Cowboy. Okay. Gotcha. So yeah, he did an erotic thriller in the 90s starring Nicole Kidman and he's got a little Pomeranian dog in it, so that looks kind of cute. So that is going to be the first film, and the second film is one called A Perfect Murder, which I am just looking up right now because I am absolutely that kind of person. It's from 1998 and it's directed by Andrew Davis, and this one stars Michael Douglas.
Yeah,
Basic Instinct.
Our boy.
He's back. I guess
he just loves these erotic sex craziness.
Yeah, the erotic thrillers. That was his thing. So Michael Douglas, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Viggo Mortensen.
Shit. I love Viggo.
And again, that's directed by Andrew Davis from the year 1998. So that's what you can expect in 2 weeks' time for your free episode. But yeah, that should wrap it all up for this week. Thanks as always for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.